Thank you so much for joining. I'd like to welcome you to our How to Be a Peer Reviewer webinar presented by Sage Publishing. Today's presentation will be split into two parts. In the first part, you'll hear from two of my colleagues at Sage about how to be an effective peer reviewer, and they'll walk us through the peer review process from start to finish. This will take about 20 minutes and will be followed by a question and answer session where we'll be joined by, they'll answer your questions. Feel free to drop anything that you've got in the chat in the Q&A function at the bottom. And we'll start with those that have the most upvotes. So if you see a question there that you like, that you particularly want our panelists to answer, please do like them. So now to get started, I'd like to present you to our team. First, Alex Morrison is a publishing editor at Sage, managing a range of STM-related journals. He has a background in content production and management, magazine publishing, and literary publishing. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in International Studies from the University of Denver and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of New Orleans. Joseph Tumolo, Joe is an associate publishing editor on Sage's U.S. Science, Tech, and Medicine journals editorial team. He joined Sage last year with experience from the Getty Research Institute Publications Program and gained over 3 years of experience with academic publishing while pursuing his PhD in Italian at UCLA. After several years, Joe relocated to his hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he is currently based. Tadu Narula is a peer review supervisor in the Hybrid Journals peer review team in the Global Services India office. She leads a team of 7 to 8 individuals and supervises the peer review process for Sage journals, ensuring seamless manuscript submission and exporting to Sage production via SageTrack. She's demonstrated effective management of journals in a peer review associate capacity, showcasing expertise in handling diverse workflows and addressing complex challenges with proficiency. She's been with Sage for over 13 years and holds a master's degree in business administration from the Institute of Marketing and Management in Delhi, India. And last, I'm Sean Scarsbrick. I'm a marketing manager on the author marketing team based out of New York, and I'm passionate about helping reviewers, especially those in the early stages of their careers, to navigate the peer review process with ease and expertise. So to get started today, I'd like to define peer review. So peer review is a process where scientists or peers evaluate the quality of other scientists' work. By doing this, the goal is to ensure that the work is rigorous, coherent, it uses past research, and adds to what is already known. The process of peer review is an integral part of publishing one's research and absolutely essential to ensuring the quality of research published and added to the research record. And with that, I'll pass it over to Joe.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Sean. It's good to be with you here with you all today. So I'm going to kick off with just a quick overview of the benefits of peer reviewing. So to begin, peer review provides a significant benefit, of course, to an individual journal, and by extension, it is a key service to a given field of study. And this is really because peer review ensures that only the highest quality of research is published by providing authors key feedback and new perspectives on their methods and results. In addition to these sort of broader benefits, there are also benefits to the individual reviewer. For example, it could open up opportunities to become a journal editor, to join an editorial board. More immediately, reviewers are recognized in Web of Science and in ORCID, which allows them to keep a record of the publications they've worked with. Reviewers might receive reviewer certificates and can include this important service to their fields on their CVs. Also at Sage Publishing, we offer reviewers a 25% discount on Sage books and free access to ebook products and Sage journals for 60 days. And there's more info on these benefits at the link on the slide, and the slides will be shared out after the webinar with you. Finally, and maybe the best way to improve your own writing is by reviewing the work of others, which is a great professional development. Moreover, people who provide good and timely reviews are also more likely to be invited to serve on an editorial board, which is, of course, more professional development. So having a nice overview of the benefits, or at least what I hope is a nice overview of the benefits of peer review, let's just jump in and talk a minute about how peer review itself actually works. So after an author submits an article, the paper will be checked over by journal editors for basic compliance. Does it meet style guidelines, formatting? Does the topic of the article fit the journal scope? If it passes these preliminary checks, the editor will then send the article out for peer review. In most cases, reviewers are matched to papers based on keywords that are provided by both parties, namely the reviewer and a given paper's authors. Reviewers are invited, and if they accept, they will have access to the paper in their reviewer center in our system, which is called SageTrack. Once reviewers have assessed a paper, they will make a recommendation of revision, rejection, or acceptance to the editor in our system. The editor then makes the final decision based on the reviewer's feedback. Now, as much as we need and love to have scholars accept the invitation to peer review, sometimes it is best to decline. For example, if an article is outside of your field of expertise. This can happen when a journal has the wrong keywords on file for a reviewer. And if this does happen, please let editors know, as it can help to correct the system to better match you to articles. If you're still working towards your degree, it is usually best to decline, maybe with the exception of a joint review, and Alex will talk a little bit more about this later. You also want to consider time constraints. Don't be afraid to ask editors for an extension. They're often very happy to grant these. But if you can't commit to a specific time frame, it is best to let the editor know upfront and to decline the invitation. Also really important are conflicts of interest, something that you should always be considering. Are there reasons why you can't be an impartial reviewer? Do you have a financial stake in the research? Is the content something that you might reuse in your own work? Now, it's important to note that this is not the same as being very familiar with the topic, which can be great for reviewers. However, if your proximity to a topic of research is such that you are concerned about a potential conflict of interest, you should let the editor know. And the editor will always be available to help you sort this out and make the right decision. So as you can see, ethics are really a key part of the peer review process, and we will get more into this on the next slide. But before that, I think it's worth noting that if you do decline, suggest someone else. This is a really great benefit and a great gift to an editor. When it comes to the ethics of peer review, sort of the core of it would be the double anonymized peer review, which means that authors don't know who reviewers are and vice versa. Reviewers don't know who authors are. So this ensures on one hand that reviewers can be candid, and also ensures that authors are not getting unfair treatment based on who they are. If a reviewer does learn the identity of an author or authors while conducting a review, they should let the editor know right away and be very forthcoming about any specific conflict of interest that arises as a result. Reviewers should also inform editors about any connection they have to a study that impacts the privacy of its participants. For example, if you happen to know a participant in a clinical trial, you should raise that with the editor. Remember also that confidentiality is key. As a reviewer, you will be given access to unpublished research, and it is therefore really important to keep this confidential. The only possible exception would be that kind of collaborative or joint review that I mentioned earlier, but that should always be arranged with an editor beforehand. Lastly, and a key thing to note is that SAGE journals generally do not allow for authors to recommend their own reviewers. This is in order to protect our journals and their reputations. In those cases when it is permitted, there is only one recommended reviewer allowed per paper. Also, please remember that author recommendations should be submitted through the journal's peer review site under the recommended reviewer step and not directly recommended to the author. Only the editor should contact the reviewer. And if you are contacted by an author with a request to review their work, please let the editor know right away.
Now that Joe has given us some background on peer reviewing, we're next going to talk about what peer reviewers should keep in mind when reviewing an article. At Sage, we use the phrase research done well to describe the bar for publication. Of course, the specifics will vary among fields, but here's how we explain it. SAGE is looking for discrete, coherent contributions to the academic record that have sufficient methodological rigor to serve as sound building blocks for future research. We'll talk about how to identify research done well in the next few slides. When a reviewer is evaluating a manuscript, there are some characteristics of the writing and structure that they may notice immediately. These are the first impressions that you might get as a reviewer. You might look for things as whether the author is using an academic writing style. For instance, whether they write in a consistent person and tense that is appropriate for their field, whether they were as specific as possible and avoided generalization, whether they avoided colloquialisms, or whether they avoided regional or discipline-specific jargon. Though the journal is not looking for reviewers to copy edit, general comments on language quality are appreciated. Some aspects to consider might be active voice over passive voice, concise language, simpler sentence construction, correct article use, and a singular plural agreement of verbs and nouns. Again, the reviewer is not responsible for copy editing, but if they encounter enough issues to make the article difficult to read, please let the editor know. It is important to consider whether or not language problems are severe or can be fixed during copy editing. The editor should also know if the reviewer is having trouble following the article because it lacks cohesiveness. Some specific concerns might include the organization and overall flow of the manuscript, a balanced use of tools like transitions and parallel construction, clearly stated research questions and findings, and an absence of extraneous material, and the correct use of headers. Lastly, the journal expects bias-free, inclusive language that is appropriate for a global audience. Authors should take care when writing about gender, age, disability, neurodiversity, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and religion. They should be sensitive to labels and appropriately specific. They should keep in mind that people have many identities, and one shared identity does not necessarily mean shared experiences. It's also worth stating here that bias-free, inclusive research goes beyond word choice and extends to the assumptions made by the researchers and the intention and design of the study. If the reviewer has concerns with any of this, it should be in the review. Overall, there are 4 key things reviewers can look for after they make their first impressions. Reporting guidelines exist for many study types and should be followed by authors when preparing an article. The reviewer can ask the editor if they are unsure of whether the journal follows specific reporting guidelines, as not all journals require them. A good resource on reporting guidelines by study type is available on the Equator Network website. An article should also make a clear contribution to the field. Depending on the journal, it might not be a requirement that all articles make significant or especially novel contributions to the field. However, at minimum, the journal does expect it to be clear what the contribution of the research is, because it is difficult for future research to build on a study that lacks clear findings and limitations. Next, we expect research to have appropriate ties to the literature. If a reviewer notices material that is missing from the literature review and would give necessary context to the study, please let the editor know. For literature reviews and discussion sections, only suggest your own articles or colleagues' articles if you have a legitimate reason for recommending them and state this clearly to the authors. Alternatively, you can simply suggest to authors that they need to update the literature with more relevant or more recent articles. It is also good to consider global literature and expanding horizons beyond the existing literature referenced in the article to elevate the discussion or analysis. Lastly, a common critique that a journal appreciates are issues with figure legends. A reviewer should be able to easily read any figures. If the reviewer has trouble, then the author should know to make corrections. Earlier, Joe spoke about reviewer ethics. This slide has to do with the ethical guidelines the author should have followed when performing their study and writing their article. A reviewer should feel free to ask the authors questions surrounding the ethics of the study in their review, and let the journal editor know if they have any concerns with the research ethics of the article they are reviewing. Specifically, feel free to ask more details on how informed consent was obtained or who gave ethical approval. If the reviewer has concerns about the privacy of the study participants, please let the journal know. This is especially important for online and open access journals, which can have wider reach than printed or paywalled journals. Lastly, let the editor know if a reviewer suspects any data or image manipulation. For example, a p-value that is too perfect, standard error bars that are too consistent, or if the figures showing experiment results have unexplained anomalies. Reviewers may also have concerns about materials used in the study. For example, contaminated or incorrect cell lines, or perhaps the results seem inconceivable or too good to be true. Any concerns like these should be raised to the editor.
So when it comes to evaluating the methods and analysis of a given paper, reviewers should focus on a number of key items. For example, are there flaws in the study design? Is the study design consistent with similar studies in the field? Are the results and conclusions appropriate for the study? Is the material and method section descriptive enough so that the study can actually be reproduced? Are the statistical techniques relevant to the study and standard for a study of its kind? And finally, are the materials and methods used in the study appropriate for the research question being addressed? Now, many of these questions raised in the materials and methods section will flow into the results, discussion, and conclusion sections. To evaluate these sections, reviewers will commonly ask themselves the following questions. Are the results presented in a way that emphasize the findings? Are these sections free of unsupported generalizations or assumptions? Are the conclusions appropriate for the study? Are there appropriate limitations and directions for future research? It's also important to take a step back and consider some big picture questions, such as, did the study accomplish what it set out to do? Did the authors follow their original hypothesis? Did they follow their own methods, and do these methods follow through to the stated conclusions? Now, remember that not all studies will yield positive results. Some will have null or negative results. We advise that you don't recommend rejection only because a paper does not yield positive results. So as you can see, peer review has really a number of complex and numerous elements to consider. Breaking down the review to match the sections of the paper is a great strategy to be both helpful and thorough. So just to give you a sense of what the elements are of a good review or report, you want to think about timely turnaround. So can you commit to that clear time frame for an editor? You want to have a good assessment of the quality of the science, the data, and the images. We want to have a really well-written review. So if we expect a well-written article, we hope to have a well-written review that is clear and easy to understand. This is really important for an editor that has to make a final decision, but also for authors that are going to be asked to incorporate some of those comments. We ask that reviewers have substantial and logically organized comments. And a great review will also provide an overview of the paper's suitability for publication, specify necessary edits, and highlight strong points as well as weaker points in the manuscript. Remember that even a great manuscript should receive substantial comments. Consider why it is so good. Focus on the methods, results, and conclusions, and explain to the editor why it should be accepted. Maybe just as important as the elements of a good review are some of the things that should be avoided in a peer review. Lack of detail. You always want to get into a clear justification and explanation that details why you're making the recommendation you're making on a manuscript. A recommendation that does not follow comments, a recommendation for acceptance, rejection, and so on, that does not follow logically from the comments should be avoided. You also want to avoid description or summary that lacks evaluation. So make sure you're always giving a clear evaluation in your opinion of the article. You also want to avoid the temptation to ask authors to cite you as reviewer, your papers without justification. If there is a scholarly justification, by all means, but it is sort of a temptation that's best to avoid. Because peer review is not a face-to-face enterprise, I think sometimes it's easy to also lose sight of the tone. So you want to avoid having a negative or aggressive tone. Be constructive, be honest, but be respectful of the work in the authors that you are reviewing. Don't rush. So it is important to be timely, but don't rush. We need polished comments, and that's what's going to be most helpful to an editor and also to your authors. And also remember that the decision recommendation should only be included in the confidential comments made to the editor. These should never be shared directly with the author.
So now that the reviewer knows what to look for when peer reviewing and how to format their responses, how does one volunteer to review? So there are two major ways a reviewer can start the journey of becoming a volunteer reviewer. The first is to create an account in the journal's peer review site. Make sure a regularly checked email address is used. An institutional email address would actually be preferred. Make sure you create or add an ORCID ID. Include a full affiliation. Specify the degree or degrees and choose the appropriate salutation. Make sure strong keywords that best illustrate their research expertise are included. Examples of good keywords and those to avoid are shown on the right of this slide. Good keywords are generally those that are descriptive but not too descriptive. The second way to become a volunteer reviewer is by connecting with editors. A reviewer may consider reaching out to editors directly via email or by creating a Web of Science account. If you are a more junior researcher, such as a PhD student, and would like to conduct a joint review with a mentor or supervisor, reach out to the editor before conducting the review. The decision to allow joint reviews is at the editor's discretion. If you have been invited to provide a review and do not have the time, do not just hand off the task to a more junior colleague to provide the review on your behalf. Please let the editor know, and they will decide how to proceed. It is important to ensure that reviewers receive the credit for the work done. For those who want to learn more about how to conduct a peer review and put together an effective reviewer report, Sage offers a number of resources in the Sage Journal Reviewer Gateway. Our How to Review Articles page, downloadable reviewer's guide, and How to Conduct a Peer Review video offer guidance on the elements of a peer review and how to assess a manuscript. Sage also partners with Web of Science and recommends their Web of Science Academy, which is linked to on the Reviewer Gateway. The Academy is a free of charge formal training course providing researchers with the skills, connections, and experience required to become an expert reviewer. With learning modules, practical experience writing reviews, feedback on reviews, and a certificate and badge on the reviewer's Web of Science profile upon completion of the course. For those who would like to learn even more about peer reviewing, Sage offers a number of additional resources on the Sage Journal Reviewer Gateway. Reviewers will find a video on how to become a peer reviewer, as well as a peer review ethics video with information about ethics and reviewer responsibilities. Reviewers can also visit the Committee of Publication Ethics, or COPE, website to read their suggested best practices for peer reviewing. Then this is called the COPE Ethical Guidelines. A great way to learn is to see examples of peer reviews. Some journals, such as Therapeutic Advances in Respiratory Diseases, follow the open peer review model where the author can see the comments made by the reviewers for a particular article. Reviewers can also look at comments made on preprint articles on many preprint servers. Again, to gain even more experience reviewing, a reviewer may consider the Web of Science Academy training course, which provides in-depth training. Lastly, we would like to thank reviewers for taking the time to support fellow researchers. Reviewing is a critical process, and reviewers help to protect the integrity of the academic record, elevate the quality of the work they review, and challenge their peers to higher standards of research and scholarly communication.
So first, before we move into the Q&A, I want to say a huge thank you to Alex and Joe for the presentation. It was very enriching and very helpful. So before we move on, I'm flagging again that Sage does have a dedicated gateway that houses all of our peer reviewer resources. So if you have any questions from where to get started, how to sign up, and what to do after a review, that's the best place to get started. So now I encourage you all to please post your questions that you have in the Q&A portion. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Taru to get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We'll take a couple of questions, starting with the first one. How can we get referees to write meaningful feedback when rejecting a manuscript or suggesting a revise and resubmit? Is there a resource list, a shortcut document to help a reference?
That's a great question. I think for editors, this might be kind of a prime editor responsibility. Be really clear about the expectations you have of reviewers. Send them to the webinars. We're always happy to help. And journals will also include a reviewer score sheet that will kind of guide them through ways that you can evaluate individual manuscripts, and those will be tailored to a journal so that you're guided through sort of the expectations that would come down from that individual publication.
From the author perspective, if you receive peer review feedback that you don't understand for a revision or a resubmission, you're always free to reach out to the editor for clarity. Now, in the case of a rejection, usually rejections are final, and editors do not need to provide further information. But if your article is rejected, you can still reach out to the editor and they might be able to provide more information as to where the decision came from.
Thank you. Next, thank you, Joseph. I'll go on to the next question. I would appreciate some guidance with scoring. For example, I completed a review and I need to submit a score, and I always have a hard time here. Are there rules, guidelines? How can the reviewer be fair to the author and review?
One thing to think about is major comments versus minor comments. So major comments are generally suggestions or questions that the author will require additional experiments or significant amount of rewriting. But minor comments are generally simpler questions that can be addressed quickly. So I think weighing those, how many significant questions are you asking and how many quick questions that can be simply answered is important to keep track of. And really thinking about the time for making revisions and the time that you think the author will need to make revisions can help you determine how significant your feedback needs to be, how significant your review needs to be.
Thanks, Alex. The next question would be, hi, some journals have the practice to ask reviewers to write down the review to the authors and separately to the editor. Is it ethical in your opinion?
I would say that when you, as a reviewer, are making comments, those comments should only go to the editor. The editor will then, take the comments under consideration, make a decision about the manuscript, and if he accepts the manuscript or she accepts the manuscript, will share those out then with the author. But you should not be making comments directly to an author. That should all be going through the editor at a journal.
Thanks, Joseph. The next question would be, how to become a peer reviewer for Sage journals? Do we get an invite? If so, how is the process? Do we apply first? Kindly guide.
I can take that one. So there are a couple of ways to become a peer reviewer with Sage. One of the major ways is to create an account through the specific journal's peer review site. So with that, you would submit your email, preferably an email that you check often. And if it's connected to an institution, even better. And you'll want to add your ORCID ID, so that can all be tied to your author account. And you'll submit your keywords. And you'll see in the slide, one of our slides, we talk about good keywords and keywords to avoid. So that will help editors find you once you're in the system. That'll help them find what topics you're interested in reviewing. And so you can sign up directly through the site, through the journal site. You could also get in contact with the journal editor directly. Express your interest to the journal editor that you're interested in peer reviewing and present yourself as a valuable reviewer. And this might be a help if you're unsure whether your area of expertise fits the journal scope. So you can double check with the editor directly before registering your details on the Web of Science page. And then the editor gets a firsthand look at your experience and can recommend whether you would be a good reviewer for the journal or not. A third way is by signing up through the Web of Science Reviewer Recognition Service. you do this by indicating your interest in reviewing for a journal. And editors use the reviewer recognition to find suitable reviewers for their journals. And then, so once you're in the reviewer recognition service, editors may contact you directly via that site to review for their journal. And I just want to reiterate that all this information can also be found on Sage's Journal Reviewer Gateway, where there's a whole page about how to become a reviewer that will walk you through the steps of those 3 options.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I'll take 1 or 2 more questions. Should reviewer check citation with references?
I think that's a great question, and I think the answer is yes. It's always good to go through any footnotes, bibliography, works cited, to get a sense of, is the bibliography up to date? Did the author do their homework, so to speak? Is this a paper that is well contextualized within the body of research? Those are all key things. I mean, I think Alex mentioned during the presentation that not all journals will have varying requirements when it comes to having like super novel, super original research. But if it's clear that an author's kind of come in and not really read the whole bibliography, or at least is kind of well versed within it, that's an issue that really should come under consideration or review. So definitely do take some time to go through citations and check them.
The next question would be, when faced with uncertainty in making a final decision on accepting or rejecting a research paper, is it appropriate to consider conditional acceptance contingent upon the implementation of proposed amendments and improvements? Furthermore, if revisions are deemed unacceptable, is it appropriate to reject the paper outright, or should the author be given an opportunity to revise and resubmit again? Long question.
That's a great question. So whenever papers are sent back for revision, they do need to be fully peer reviewed again upon resubmission. So we don't really work in conditional acceptances upon revision. So it'll be sent back for revision and it won't be accepted until it's accepted fully. So that's important to remember. And if the revisions are deemed unacceptable, then it could be sent back for more revisions or resubmission. But I think it's important to remember that as peer reviewers, your role is to provide your suggestion, do the review and provide your suggestion. And at the end of the day, the final decision comes down to the editor. So the editor of the journal will take your suggestion, take all your notes, and they will be the one who makes the final decision as to whether to accept or reject an article. And you can always contact an editor if, sometimes you might suggest that an article be accepted and you see that the editor rejects it, or the other way around. And of course, you can always reach out to the editor for further information if you thought an article should have been accepted and they ended up rejecting it. There's numerous reasons for why that could happen. And remember, our standard is to have 2 peer reviewers. So sometimes you're not the only one reviewing an article as well. But all revised articles go through the peer review process again, and can definitely go through another round of revision if necessary.
All right, thanks, Alex. The next question is the level of criticality of reviewer is also related to the ranking of journal?
It's a good question. I would say the short answer is no. I think that peer review is always critical to any journal. So the journal can really, in some ways, only be as good as what it is publishing, and what it is publishing can only be good if it has good peer review. So to really make sure that journals are putting out like the best, well-checked, sort of reliable research is to have that good peer review. So it is always a really, really important part of the editorial process, no matter the ranking of a journal.
Thanks, Joseph. So, All right. So the next question would be, what is the correct tone for writing a review feedback?
So that's a good question. And I think really what you want to be is constructive. When you're writing feedback, you want to be as constructive and helpful as you can. And so, what does that mean? That means being clear and specific with your feedback. Avoid strong punctuation in all caps, as that can come off as a bit aggressive. And yeah, but I think really being as specific as possible will help the editor, will help the author understand what you're talking about, and understand and help the editor and author understand what the issue is and what needs to be changed. There's the golden rule of treat others how you would like to be treated. Research is hard. People work very hard on it. So I think always respecting that maybe if there are some issues, the author still worked very hard on their work. So respecting that and treating articles how you would want your article to be treated.
Alex, I'll take another question. That would be, does it happen when we submit an article to a journal in future, the journal editors can consider the author for some future review?
Yeah, absolutely. You're always sort of beholden by the ethics that Alex and I talked about in the presentation, but sort of submitting, getting involved in a journal, those are all ways to kind of get on the radar of an editor. And if the editor knows your research, it can be a great boost in trying to match you to papers, because the more they know about you, the better they are going to be able to evaluate your ability to evaluate and review a particular manuscript.
I'll take on the next question. Is oneself theoretical frame considered a kind of bias? One can only review something from one owns.
Yeah, I think that's a great question that gets into the sort of one of the stickier parts of like the ethics of peer review. You should be an expert in what you are reviewing. That's really important. But if you're caught up and say you're reading the paper and you're thinking, wow, I'm going to cite this like all over my next, set of papers, that's a point where you might need to take a step back, talk to the editor, think through the ethics of it, whether maybe you are actually too proximate at that point. So I think that there's probably not an easy answer. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, but always try to maintain that balance of, yes, I'm an expert in the field, and no, I'm not too close to this in order to, in a way that would prevent me from being partial or impartial, rather.
Thanks, Joseph. So the next question would be, are we to include feedback on grammar, citation formatting, punctuation, and similar? I have heard that this is the job of the editor, and I have also heard that it is the reviewer's responsibility.
So I guess I can only speak for Sage and how we run our peer review system. And for us, copy editing is not the responsibility of the reviewer. The reviewer is mainly focused on the academic content and the research content of the piece. Now, at times, if poor punctuation, if formatting, if these things are severe enough that they are interfering with the understanding, that would be important to note. You would want to make a note that there are consistent grammar mistakes, and you want to note that to the author. But that can be a more general note. You don't have to make a note every single time that there is a spelling error or a grammatical error, as there are copy editors who do that job. But again, if it's severe enough, you definitely want to make a note if it's affecting the comprehension of the article. Make a note to the editor.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. The next question would be, what should you do if you are asked to review an article that is outside of your key area of study?
Great question. If you don't feel qualified to review an article, you should be upfront about that, let the editor know, and suggest someone else. So that is, like I mentioned during the presentation, a huge gift to an editor. Journals are often working with these crazy and tight and complex deadlines. Peer review is often one of those things that can delay the process. So if you can actually get someone to jump in your stead, that might be the next best thing to actually doing the review itself, and the editor will probably love you forever.
Thanks, Joseph. So, I think I've covered all questions. So, majorly all questions we could answer. So, over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much to everybody who's asked a question. To all of the questions that we haven't addressed today, know that we have them on the back end, and we'll look at them and send any follow-up via email. So to wrap up today, I wanted to flag a few things that are upcoming from us at Sage and what other future webinars we've got planned. So we've got a few happening next week. On April 3rd, we have a How to Do Research and Get Published webinar on quantitative methodology. So if that's an area of interest, please do check that one out. We also have a webinar scheduled for next week on how to be a peer reviewer, specifically for the journal Sage Open. Sage Open is one of the largest interdisciplinary journals published at Sage, so it's a really interesting one. And if that fits within your area of expertise, please do consider joining us for that webinar. I will follow up with everybody who is joining today and everyone who's registered with links to those recordings, or to those registrations, excuse me. And anyone watching us live, you'll receive a certificate of attendance and also a copy of the slides we're sharing today. So I wanted to end today with a huge thank you to everybody who's joining us, and then also to Joe and Alex for guiding us through, and then for Taru for driving us through the Q&A portion of today. So again, huge thank you to everybody, and we hope to see you in a future webinar. Thank you very much.